every place I might live and breathe the gospel of Jesus Christ. Amen. Good morning again, everyone. So as we've said, it's kind of a special Sunday today. We're welcoming Chris into our worship service, into our church family. We're welcoming a few visitors here as well, and welcoming a few folks back who have gone away for a couple of months. So that's been a pleasure for us to do. Easter's in full swing. We're a few weeks away from Pentecost here. Last week, we acknowledged Earth Day. We were lucky that Sunday was actually the 22nd. So we did that, and we're going to kind of stay in that mode this week as we explore the theme of branches. We're continuing that metaphor of Christ in the Gospel of John. We're going to use it to reflect on creation, but also to reflect on the church a little bit. Last week we had a prayer video queued up for the conclusion of the sermon. We were having some projector issues. They were continuing this morning, but I think we've got them sorted out, so we're going to try to share that at the end of today's sermon if we can. So, as we look forward to that, we give thanks for the blessings of creation, for our responsibility for caring for it, and for God's presence in that responsibility and in that activity. So we also acknowledged Arbor Day this past week, so we're again sticking with that kind of arboreal theme of the branches. Last year, around this same time, I spoke at length about, as I often do, my love of the outdoors, and particularly of forests and trees. I told a little bit about John Muir and Muir Woods in California, home of some really beautiful redwoods. I shared about my dream of one day visiting the General Sherman tree in Sequoia National Park, the largest living thing on Earth. So some of this may be coming back to you for the first time after that sermon roughly a year ago. But there is another reason we are talking about branches this week. There was another event that happened recently, and it was an event that simultaneously provided hope and perspective here in the United Methodist Church, but also heightened some of our anxiety about the church's future. Last week, the United Methodist Church celebrated the 50th anniversary of its original merger in 1968. So on that day, April 23rd, is the day the Methodist Church combined with the Evangelical United Brethren to form the new United Methodist Church. We're going to delve into a little bit of history and church structure, so I apologize. It'll be a little dry for a couple of minutes here, but we'll get into the theology as well. So the Methodist Church itself had reunited three denominations only a few decades earlier. The Methodist Episcopal Church joined with the Methodist Protestant Church and the Methodist Episcopal Church South back in 1939. Don't ask me why those three were separate to begin with. I don't know why. I may have learned while I was in seminary, but I've since probably forgotten about it. But the story of our denomination, at least over the 20th century, has been one not of schism and branching off, but one of reuniting and making itself whole once again. It's been about branches growing back together more so than growing apart. And so as part of this 50-year celebration, the United Methodist Church has been publishing all kinds of articles. They've been very active on social media. They've shared things about the history, about the merger, and we're planning a large-scale denomination-wide celebration on Heritage Sunday, which will also be Pentecost Day. These stories, articles, retrospectives, many of them have been shared on our church Facebook page. So again, I encourage you all to go take a look at that, Walled Lake United Methodist Church on Facebook. There's some new info on there. It includes a timeline of United Methodist history, 50 reasons to celebrate the United Methodist Church, a quiz of United Methodist trivia, which I failed, a reflection by our bishop, David Bard, from the Michigan Conference website, and many others. There are also several good Earth Day articles on there that we have shared, if you're interested in scrolling down the page a little bit. One category in particular that's been illuminating for someone younger like me is the dissolution of the central jurisdiction back in 1968. The central jurisdiction was a racially segregated jurisdiction composed entirely of African American congregations. Needless to say, it was very problematic. Looking back on this event, among others, it reveals that although thankfully it no longer exists, that the legacy of racial relations in the church, as in America itself, remains complicated and challenging. Yet, as we have said, the recent history of the United Methodist Church is one not of branching off and splitting, but of growing together. So this past Friday night, I had the pleasure of attending the organizing conference for the newly formed Heritage District here in the Michigan Conference. Bill joined me at Jackson First United Methodist Church. It's a big, beautiful old church in the heart of downtown Jackson. So as many of you know, for many years, the state of Michigan contained two conferences in the UMC. We had the West Michigan Conference and the Detroit Conference. A couple years back, these two decided to merge into the newly formed Michigan Conference. So we're now part of a statewide annual conference. It includes churches from Ypsilanti to Escanaba, from Kalamazoo to Alpena, from downtown Detroit to Mackinac City and Sault Ste. Marie. And boy, do we have some great place names here in Michigan. So through this merger, the number of districts has gone from 12 down to 9, and our former Ann Arbor district remains largely intact, but it now includes much of the former Albion district, hence the location in Jackson. So we are now called the Heritage District, as was voted on at the gathering, and pending approval from the bishop, I guess. But all of this is really just window dressing. It's kind of dry trivia about the history of the church, its structure, and its organization. The important part is, the real point is, what has been made possible through that structure. At a time when the worldwide United Methodist Church cannot seem to agree on certain issues, particularly social justice issues, it is in some ways forgetting its own history, the immediate history of reconciliation and wholeness, and the extended history of worldwide growth and diversification. Many metaphors have been used for the United Methodist Church: a large tent, an extended family, a big ship that takes a long time to steer. We have that one I find very true. We have congregations gathering next to the cross and flame here in Michigan and down in Texas, in New England and in California, in Europe and Latin America, in sub-Saharan Africa, and in the ever more fascinating Korean Peninsula. This diversity is part of why the United Methodist Church is going through, as we have suggested before, a bit of an identity crisis, particularly surrounding the issue of gay rights and same-sex marriage. We have a lot of cultural barriers to overcome, and that same size and diversity can hold us back at times. I've indicated before that I do not agree with certain things in the social principles, and this is one of the biggest. And I know that we have varying perspectives on this here in Walled Lake. I have always felt that being the United Methodist Church allowed for these perspectives to coexist. And so I don't necessarily share the anxiety that many have about the future of the worldwide UMC during this 50th anniversary. We are going to get some clarity about this in the next couple of years. The 2016 UMC General Conference in Portland commissioned a team of bishops to provide discernment and leadership on this issue. A special General Conference will be held in 2019, 1 year before the scheduled one in Minneapolis in 2020, to discuss ways of moving forward. The General Conference, for those unfamiliar, is the quadrennial worldwide gathering The annual conferences are smaller. They take place yearly. Ours is going to be in Traverse City this year. But again, this is all just organizational stuff, procedural stuff, church politics. I'm very fascinated by it, but not too worried by it. And the reason for that, again, is that at the end of the day, however we are organized, we are all united in the love of Christ. Recently, we've been talking a little bit about incarnation, about its theology, and about the reality that says God is present, not just within the person of Jesus Christ, but within all of us. It is why creation and creation care are so sacred. It is why the human body is so sacred. And it is why the immediacy and urgency of our worship together is so sacred, this week and every week. This incarnational theology helps us to see God in each other. It helps us to remember and uphold that greatest commandment, which we revisited today in our Johannine epistle, to love one another. For love comes from God. God's love and grace are the why and the how of our time on earth. Our love comes from God, who loved us first before ever we could comprehend it. And in 1 John, we kind of get a rehash of that John 3:16 gospel passage, don't we? The epistle says, "This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him." And since God loved us, we also ought to love one another. For God is love. God is love. It really is that simple. God is here with us, and God is in the love we show to one another. Whether we are talking about the sanctity of creation or about the unifying of the church, the one thing present, the one thing making all other things whole, is that loving presence of God. And it has been evident in the work of our two conferences as they have agreed to merge. It has been evident in the arguments that we have had with one another. And it remains in the way that we hold each other together in fellowship and even in tension. So today, trusting that our screen is working, I'm prepared to offer a verbal version of this prayer, but Ethan's got it figured out, I think. So rather than offering that, we're going to conclude with the prayer reflection from last week. It's a beautiful video. It's about 3 minutes long, and it gives us a great perspective on the sanctity of creation, which we all share together. So let us take a moment and pray.